rehabilitated, and real entertaining. This is the Carl Jackson Podcast.
Welcome to this edition of the Carl Jackson Show podcast, your daily dose of objective truth in a world of confusion and lies. Please subscribe wherever you go to get your podcasts. We're also on YouTube and Rumble. If you'll rate and review, give us a 5 there so we'll move up the charts. All things social media at the Carl Jackson Show, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Also, today's show is brought to you by MyPillow. MyPillow, Mike Lindell has built a fabulous business at MyPillow, American jobs, American manufacturing, and you know that he's a patriot. On MyPillow's 20-year anniversary with over 80 million MyPillows sold, Mike is offering an exclusive deal to my listeners. Right now, you can get a queen-size MyPillow for only $19.98. They typically sell for $69.98. If you want the king size, that's $29.98. You'll also receive deep discounts on all MyPillow products, such as bed sheets, mattress toppers, pet beds, mattresses, my slippers, and so much more. So if there's anything that you ever wanted to try out on mypillow.com or at mypillow.com, now is the time to do it. All you have to do is go to the radio podcast square at the top of the page and enter my name, Carl, C-A-R-L, to receive those deals, or give them a call if you prefer, 800-858-0263. All of Mike's products come with a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee, so you cannot beat that with a bat. But again, American jobs, American manufacturing, and a good night's rest. You cannot beat that. MyPillow.com, promo code Carl. All right, guys, I've been looking forward to this podcast and my next guest here because whenever I see him or whenever – actually, I didn't realize that I had seen him on TV until my producer sent me the picture and a video, and I was like, oh, yeah, I know who this guy is. And so I've been looking forward to speaking to him because it's obvious that our educational system, K through 12, as well as college, has just gone down the drain, so to speak. So I'm excited to speak with Nicholas Giordano, Professor Nicholas Giordano. He's a professor of political science. He's also the host of the PAS Report podcast and a fellow at Campus Reform. So, Professor Nicholas, thank you so much for joining us today on the Carl Jackson Show podcast.
Thank you for having me, Carl.
All right. So I was telling you before we came online here, Professor, I went to probably a couple of years of college, not quite 2 years of college before I had to drop out of college. But so I was a little intimidated. I got into writing and all this kind of stuff. Eventually, I got asked to start debating people, liberals, on a local television news station here. And then I would go in, and some of the people that they would bring in were brilliant. There's no doubt about it. But I was always able to hang with them. And then there were some that they would bring in that I was like, okay, these people have a degree. These people, they're an attorney. Not the brightest bulbs in the bunch. And so I started thinking, is it just me? Or is our educational system dumbing people down?
No, it's not just you. I mean, we created this myth that the only pathway to success in life is through a 4-year university degree. And when you just simply cycle students through the system and you continue to drop standards throughout that time, that piece of paper no longer has the value it once did. So it's not just you. A lot of people are recognizing that the students that are graduating today, they're not coming out primed, ready to go, ready for the workforce. Instead, they're coming out and they're unable to think critically. They're unable to be productive in the workplace. They have difficulties interacting with coworkers. And it's really a reflection on the collapse of our educational institutions.
I read a column of yours, and you talked about the new millennial and the Generation Z professors that are replacing some of the older professors, and what you're observing on college campuses or on the college campus. Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Absolutely, because I come from a unique background. I come from the student perspective, and then I have the perspective as a professor teaching at a college. So when I was going to school as a student, I had professors across the ideological spectrum. Some were right-leaning, some were left-leaning, some were avowed Marxists. But the one thing they all had in common is that they had a love for education. They had a love and passion for debate, for dialogue, for intellectual curiosity, all the things that college is supposed to be about. And it was refreshing because we actually had fun in our classrooms being able to challenge the professor would challenge us. And then those professors began to retire. It was like, the great retirements that came along as the baby boom generation was retiring. You had this new generation of professors coming into the fold that were much more ideological. But not only were they ideological, they were much more authoritarian, thinking that just because that they went to college and grad school and they earned their PhD, that they know everything, that they know it all. And the students can challenge those beliefs, that what the professor says is right. And it was a remarkable shift when you actually think about that. I mean, I've been teaching political science, American government, world politics for 20 years now. I don't claim to know everything about everything. It's impossible. I mean, I'm constantly learning. I just learned, 10 years ago that it was an Italian merchant that actually came up with all men are created equal. It was an Italian merchant that came to the United States in 1773, befriended Thomas Jefferson, gave a speech at a Virginia church that Thomas Jefferson translated because he spoke Italian, and they would have conversations about liberty. So I'm in the field, and I didn't learn that until about 10 years ago. So it shows you that the professors, they don't know everything. And the fact that you have professors today where it's either their points of view or you're going to get an F, well, that's not education. And nobody wants to pay tens of thousands of dollars to simply be indoctrinated. That's a big problem. So I think that we have this elite class out there that is truly trying to indoctrinate this new generation of students, and they've been successful. We have to acknowledge that. And campus reform, we've been reporting on the mindset of the student body and how it's changed over the years. But that's the challenge that we're up against.
Professor, let me ask you, I've noticed this shift as well in the culture, and it seems to me at some point, what was discussed in academia and higher education seeped out into all of culture, where I even feel like with neighbors, you used to be able to speak to your neighbor and just agree to disagree. I mean, I'm surrounded by liberals, like the liberals have turned into leftists without questioning anything. And it's like, if you're on the right, you're just an evil, it didn't used to be that way. And I used to be a liberal. I didn't used to think of people on the right that way. You know what I mean? So it's like, at what point did all of this, because I think it came out of academia and just spread into the culture.
It has come out of academia. There's zero doubt about that this is a direct result of what's been going on the college campuses. And see, that's the thing. So it used to be that we could respectfully disagree with each other, but we knew how to engage in conversation. We knew how to engage in debate and dialogue. And at the end of the day, we could still be friends. We could still go out and get a beer. It didn't matter. And then the mindset began to shift. And you notice this beginning in the early 2000s, where speakers would come on campus, they would be shouted down, they would be silenced, chased off. Student groups that were deemed offensive would be shut down. There would be attacks on student groups, and nobody would ever get punished. And there was a remarkable change in the leftist mindset where they would now look at people and believe that their politics, their political opinions. I mean, let's be honest here. When we talk about the issues, those are opinions. We could use evidence and facts to back up our opinions, but they're still opinions. Well, the left has made the determination that your political opinions define you as a human being, that the political opinions you have will determine whether you are moral and righteous or whether you are evil and you deserve to be shunned in society. And so it is a big problem because we don't have real debate in this country. Whenever I hear the phrase, we need to have an honest conversation, I laugh because no, you don't want to have an honest conversation. You want me to bow to your ideological beliefs, and that's your idea of an honest conversation. The second I say something that you disagree with, well, you're going to find that offensive, and then I'm going to be labeled as a racist or a bigot or a misogynist or some other type of ist that exists.
You know what, Professor? I got to tell you, just the fact that you're in academia gives me a sigh of relief. I pray for a million more of you to infiltrate academia because it is scary. Talk to us about grade inflation, what that is, what you're seeing, and what you're seeing.
So, and I find great inflation is probably one of the biggest problems that we have. It's the extension of the everyone gets a trophy. That's what it really comes down to. So what we've seen throughout the last 30 years in academia, from the K through 12 level and the college level, is we've seen standards were routinely dropping. The writing was not as quality as it used to be. The putting together coherent thoughts and sentences and paragraph structure, it was much different compared to other students from other generations. The reading levels, I mean, obviously reading has fallen off a cliff. Students don't read anymore. And that's the remarkable thing. So the proficiency levels were pretty much staying the same, but the standards were dropping. So I found that interesting. Then when you look at the grading, you started to see grades go up. So if you go back to the 1980s and the early 1990s, the average grade point average in college was about 2.6, 2.7. Today, the average grade point in college is about 3.2 to 3.3. Now
So it's risen.
correct, it's risen. Even though the students know less, they're performing worse, the grades have actually increased. And so how is that happening? Why is that happening? And it's really easy to see, because if you live in New York, you get a picture of how it works. So in New York State students perform twice below the national average when it comes to the National Report Card in education. Twice below.
Wow. Okay.
The amazing part is, rather than this send off alarm bells and say we are failing the student body, we are not educating our students. Instead, the New York State Board of Regents decided that it was going to redefine what basic proficiency actually means in order to meet the new normal. That's the amazing part. So instead of saying we need to have high standards, we need to make sure that we're producing the best and brightest students that led America to become the sole superpower of the world. Instead of saying that we need to fix the problems that are broken, we're going to redefine what basic proficiency means. We're going to dumb down the standards even more, and we're just going to sweep this on the rug to cover it up.
How much? Okay, that's
going on all over the country.
Oh, it's such a scary thought. The self-esteem movement, DEI, social justice, CRT. How much has this played a part in dumbing down minorities and, quite frankly, all students? Because I'd imagine that you have to dumb down the smart ones because you're giving them the same curriculum. And am I wrong?
Well, as I've been saying, and as we've been arguing at Campus Reform, this diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice movement, the CRT that's being bred into all curriculums around the country, from K through 12 through to college level, it's extraordinarily damaging. But not only is it damaging, it's also dangerous. So let's look at the damaging aspect first. The damaging aspect is that it seeks to redefine what educational success is, and it cuts a lot of things out of school curriculums. We don't have American civic education. If you ask American students today, what is the difference between liberty and freedom? Now, here's two words that we constantly use here in the United States. It's part of the basis of the core American values that we have, and yet students can't define it. If you ask students, and I do this all the time because every single semester I give my students a citizenship exam the first day, and I give them a constitution test. And 86% of them will fail it. 86%. Basic questions on the citizenship exam. Who is the Speaker of the House? Who has the power to declare war? Name one of the three writers of the Federalist Paper. Name one of your two senators that represent New York State. So we're talking basic questions here that they get wrong. When it comes to the Constitution, they can't differentiate between the Russian Constitution and the American Constitution. And it's really startling. So I'll ask students after I give these assignments, and I play along with them with the Constitution, because I make them write a paragraph on what they think about I give them the Russian Constitution to read, what they think about it, and we discuss it in class. And then finally, I'll break the news that they didn't really read the American Constitution, that in fact, they actually know more about Russia today than they do the United States.
Wow.
And I'll ask them,
wow.
You went through a K through 12 system. Have you ever been assigned to read the Constitution? And maybe one or two out of each class will raise their hands that they've actually read the Constitution. Now, that should be unacceptable in our society. This is a country that had one of the greatest education systems. This is a country that, even though, I mean, if you look, people in the 50s and 60s, they may have dropped out in grades 9, 10, 11, but they dropped out, started businesses. They were smart. They were successful. They had common sense. You look at today, kids are going through more schooling than any generation before them, but they actually tend to know less about America, American ideals, our country. So that's where it's damaging the students, because if they can't explain or understand America, well, what are we doing to them, and what are we actually teaching them in the classroom? And we could get to that in a little bit. When I say it's dangerous, the reason it's so dangerous is, one, diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice programs being built in, they're extraordinarily divisive. They are trying to factionalize our society, turn us into groups that pit itself against each other, and it tribalizes society. And there hasn't been ever a successful tribal society to exist. So that's where it's dangerous. But also, if we look at the numbers, if you're constantly being told that America is a horrible place, that America is a place that was built on racism and slavery, if you're being told that America is all about sin, that it was founded in sin and it will always be about the original sin of slavery, how can you have a love and appreciation of that country that has been fostered and developed in evil? And that's the thing. So we're seeing this detachment of the younger generations, millennials and Gen Z, from the understanding of America, but also appreciating America, appreciating the United States. And that's why only 38% of the American people today believe patriotism is important, and even less than that amongst millennials and Gen Z. So we see the damaging effects it has. Now you factor in all the migrants, the illegal immigrants that have come across the border in the last several years. They are now going into an educational system, and they are being told that they just came to a country that hates them, a country that despises them. And so what type of loyalty are they going to have towards the country? Right. How are they going to be able to assimilate into the country? And how are they going to be able to assimilate their cultures and adopt the American culture? And they're not. That's the truth.
Oh, man, that is such a scary thought. I was just reading an article that Victor Davis Hanson had written about illegal immigration, and that's one of the things that he referenced. And that is a completely scary thought, especially considering that we basically have open border policies right now. And I'm speaking to Professor Nicholas Giordano. He is the host of the PAS Report podcast, political science professor, also a fellow at Campus Reform's Higher Education Fellowship. Obviously, he has great stuff to offer us here. Professor, I want to ask you this. Obviously, we've seen, as a result of the COVID lockdowns, we saw just testing scores, reading, math, all of this stuff fall off of a cliff. But I'm wondering if it was kind of a blessing in disguise. Like, where our students seem to have been already on this path, or our educational system of just total decline, and the lockdowns forced parents to see what was really happening in schools, and actually perhaps that was a wake-up call. Your take?
That may have been the only silver lining when we do look at it from that perspective. I mean, listen, I've been arguing that the collapse of the education system, it started a decade and a half ago. COVID just woke everyone up to the fact of what I was witnessing in the classroom. So people finally got a taste of the things that we are witnessing on the front lines in the colleges and universities throughout the country. And it really is remarkable. I mean, first of all, who in their right mind would have thought keeping kids out of school for 2 years would have been a good thing? I mean, you have to be an idiot to think that. We all knew that was going to be a disaster. We know that remote education doesn't really work, never has. And it's different if it's someone that's 25 years old, they're a grad student, they have a career, and they're taking an online college program to get a graduate degree, or they're taking continuing education courses. They're mature and responsible. So it's a big difference talking about them than talking about 6, 7, 8-year-olds logging onto a computer. And here's the amazing part, right? Doctors, the American Medical Association, American Red Cross, American Psychological Association, they were all saying screen time's bad. And what did we do? Well, we quadrupled their screen time. Okay.
Man.
So students were pretending to learn, teachers were pretending to teach, and they lost 2 years, up to 2 years in the urban areas. They lost a year in most suburban areas. And in some cases, they lost about 6 months of education. We are now witnessing the devastating effects of those closures. Now, here's the thing. We know that students aren't at the grade levels that they're really in, but not a single student was held back. Nobody thought to say, you know what? Let's just mark it off as a lost year. Let's just have the kids go to school for an extra year. I mean, that wouldn't have been that big of a deal to just make it, okay, you know what? No one learned anything. We're going to have another year. That's what we should have done in order to get students.
That's a great point.
Instead, we cycled them through to the next grade. So now you have a teacher in the next grade that has a bunch of students that aren't prepared. So they have to go back in their curriculums, try to catch those students up, which they can never do, and also teach the requirements based on whatever grade level they're in. It's not going to work. This is going to be a failure for decades. We are going to see the devastating effects of this. And what's even before COVID, most people don't know, but 12th grade textbooks are written at 7th and 8th grade reading levels. That's before COVID. Why are 12th grade textbooks written in 7th and 8th grade reading levels? They should be written in 12th grade.
You're devastating me right now.
Well, it's just amazing, and nobody questions it. And yet, look at how much money we spend. If we take the local, state, and federal government, we spend over $1 trillion a year on education. That's more than every single other country, more than any other country. The only one, this next nearest is Germany. They spend, I believe, about $300 billion on education. Okay, we spend.
Whoa! They spend $300 billion. We spend $1 trillion.
Correct. And what are we producing? I mean, let's just look at Baltimore. Baltimore, you have 54 high schools that cannot produce a single student that's proficient in mathematics. Not a single student. 29 high schools can't produce a single student that meets basic proficiency in reading. Yet they're spending, what, $25,000 per student per year? Here in New York State, we spend $38,000 per student per year. In New York City, in the statewide, it's about $25,000 to $29,000. And what are we getting? Where's our return on our investments? It's not like we're producing a bunch of Einsteins out there. If we were producing Einsteins, that would be a different story. But we're producing a student body that can't meet the basic proficiency. And then we pretend as if we're successful in the education system. Oh, look, graduation rates are up. Yeah, the only reason graduation rates are up is because you're just promoting them when they may not deserve to be promoted.
Man, this is quickly becoming one of my favorite but saddest podcasts here, Professor. This is a must listen to. The amount of money that we're spending for the return of investment is absolutely just absolutely baffling to me. And I was listening to an ad earlier. I don't know. I was just listening to radio. I happened to hear this ad of how Chinese students are being taught how to handle money at basically pre-K age. I'm like, are we? There's nothing like that exists in that I know of in academia. I remember growing up and going to junior high back in the day where we had wood shop and metal shop, and you could learn accounting even then, how to balance a checkbook, so on, etc. And I understand that so many things are digital now, but I'm like, being able to work with your hands and your brain and put things together, auto mechanics class, like I don't see any of that now.
Well, a lot of those types of programs shifted to electives. So when I was going to school, it was a requirement in 7th grade. You had to take a half year of home economics, learn how to cook and sew, and you had to take a half year of wood shop. Here's the beauty. I could actually sew a button when a button I'm not a great sewer. I'm not a great seamstress, but I could sew a button. If I need to cook a meal, I could cook a meal. These are life skills that never go away. If I need to do basic work in my house, I could do it because of what I learned from those courses. But now we've done away with those courses. Now you could elect to take them if you want to, but they're not required. In 9th and 10th grade, as students are starting to get their first jobs, Why aren't we teaching them about saving, investing, and compound interest, learning to live off 80% of the check and put 20% of your paycheck away? I mean, those are valuable skills that would go a long way in their life. I always say this, math is extraordinarily important, and I don't want anyone to misconstrue what I'm saying. I understand the importance of math. Every single empire, every single superpower led in mathematics during their reign. But we focus so much on things like binomials and trinomials. And I had a really hard time in high school through binomials and trinomials. If you put a binomial in front of me today, I couldn't solve it. I'll admit it. I couldn't solve it. Guess how many binomials and trinomials I've accounted since I graduated 10th grade math?
Probably none.
None. And I've been pretty successful. Now let's look at government, right? Government impacts every aspect of our lives, from accrediting schools and institutions to teaching what we learn. When we go to fill up our cars with gas, if we want to start a business, if we want to do work on our homes, if we want to get married, all that involves government. And yet we don't teach American government. And we have social studies, but that's not American government. Okay, and that's the amazing part. As government runs every aspect of our lives, careers, you have to get licensed through the government, whatever it may be, we don't teach it. Well, why not? And let's just put it this way. I mean, look at the education system as a whole. Show me any other industry that would survive a 23% proficiency rating. Like, imagine oil and gas companies were only 23% proficient in getting oil out of the ground. Would you visit a heart surgeon that was only 23% proficient in conducting heart surgeries? I wouldn't want to see that heart surgeon. And yet this is what we're doing.
Man, this is absolutely good stuff, but scary stuff. Hey, Professor, I want to ask you this, because there's a debate within the Republican conservative circle. It's kind of a binary debate: public school or school choice, whether that's a private school, whether that's a charter school. But what I don't hear is, I think, enough of what you're talking about. We need to fix government schools. We need to fix public education. That has to be an issue. That has to be a platform issue for conservatives, constitutionalists, Republicans, et cetera, does it not?
It does, because they don't realize the grand scheme. And what I mean by that, first of all, I do believe that the tax dollar should follow the student. If you have a child that's in a failing district, why should they be held hostage because of their zip code? That parent should say, I want the kid out of that school, and I'm going to send them either to a private school or charter school, or I'm going to send them to the public school in the neighboring district that's being successful. So it doesn't only have to be the private and charter schools. Why can't they just go to a different public school that is successful? And what people don't realize, so I'm an advocate for letting tax dollars follow the parents around and the parents getting to make the decision. But what the Republicans and conservatives need to realize is that no matter what, overwhelmingly, the majority of students are going to go through a public education system.
Right.
And your child could have the best education in the world. You could either homeschool them, you could send them to a private school, spend all that money. You could give them the best education. But if 90% of the population is going through a failed public school system, when the country collapses, it doesn't matter what education your child received. It's irrelevant. So you have to fix the public education system if you want to see the survival of this country, because every single bad idea that comes out of a university campus is now infecting every aspect of our society.
Professor, I was reading your column. I have just a couple more or a few more questions for you, if you don't mind. But I was reading through one of your columns, and I forget the exact stat. I don't have it in front of me now, but something to the effect of PhDs or professors in colleges today, they're 25 times more likely to come to a household that has a PhD. So these are people that typically have no real world experience. They've gone, K through 12, college. They go and get their graduate, and then they're right off to a college or high school, perhaps, teaching our kids, but they've never developed real life experience themselves. Do I have that right? Am I in the right vicinity there?
Yes, you are. So the majority of people that go out and get their PhDs go right back in the classroom. They actually never leave the classroom. They transition from student to teacher. And that's what makes me unique as a professor. I actually come from the outside. I'm one of the few professors that does not have a PhD. I have real world life experiences. I worked in the Homeland Security emergency management arena. I worked at all levels of government. I worked in the private sector when it comes to Homeland Security and emergency management. So when it comes to textbook knowledge, you could know everything you want from a textbook. You could read that textbook over and over again. But the textbook does not translate into reality. Theory does not always translate into reality. When I was doing emergency management and Homeland Security, whenever a disaster would hit, it's not like it could be like, oh, let me turn to 132 in my textbook to see what I need to do during this disaster. That's not the way it worked. And you learn by experience. So you bring something different when you do have that real world experience as opposed to being in the academic bubble your entire life. Unfortunately, a lot of the PhDs, they belong in that academic bubble because let's face it, some of the degree programs that are being offered are completely useless outside of academia. You're not going to be able to get a job in Caribbean studies when you graduate. The only option for you is to go into academia and teach Caribbean studies.
Man, it's such a great point, and it's impacting everything: government, industry, corporations, so on, et cetera, because we're getting all these people that are graduating and being taught a lot of these left-wing ideologues, and then they just carry it over into the culture, and it's just insane. And what we're seeing, I just want to make sure that I'm not missing anything, Professor, because you're one of these guests. If you go, I'm like, doggone it, I should have asked him. I should have asked him that. So I just want to breeze through my notes. I do want to ask you this: Is there some hope? How do we fix this? Because obviously it's not just a higher education issue. It is K through 12. What should we be doing to fix our school system?
Well, there is hope, right? I mean, just look at the millions of parents that have gotten involved. Look at the millions of parents that are showing up at school boards around the country. I mean, people don't realize this, but prior to the coronavirus, if you got like 10 parents at a school board meeting, that was a lot. Today, school board meetings are standing room only. That's how many parents are going. So there is hope because parents see the failures that exist. They understand that they believe that the education system was operating in good faith. Listen, in this day and age, parents are busy. You have parents working and they're working hard. It's very difficult to just survive. And so they pawned all the education to the schools without realizing, hey, let me see what they're learning. Then when they found out what they were learning, they were outraged. So we are seeing signs of that. We're seeing other optimistic signs. So you have Google, IBM, Bank of America, Tesla, the state of Virginia, state of New Jersey. At Campus Reform, we've been reporting on this, how they're doing away with the 4-year college degree requirements because they feel, hey, if you're not going to train the students appropriately to be able to go into the workforce, well, then we don't need these 4-year college degree requirements. They could take some courses at a community college and then we'll train them in the actual jobs. And so we could train them the way we want without them being ideologically corrupted by the campus institutions. And so that certainly helps because that will wake colleges up. Sooner or later, colleges are going to have to come to the realization we either change our ways or we're going to go into oblivion all through self-inflicted wounds. There are hopeful signs. You are seeing more professors speaking up and speaking out. You know, Campus Reform's Leadership Institute, they put together the Higher Education Fellowship for professors to speak out, to air their grievances, to show that there's an alternative way. And then we have to redesign the curriculums, which we are seeing in certain states. I believe it's Iowa just implemented that in order for students to get their high school diploma, they actually have to pass a citizenship exam. You know, I wanted to go a little further. I think that we should send every single student abroad to a dictatorship, to some socialist or communist country for about a month and see how they like it. They'll come back to the United States with a new appreciation for the United States. I can guarantee that.
The WNBA player Brittany Griner did.
Yeah. Right? But at least the citizenship test, you know, the civics test for those high school diplomas, at least that's a start. At least there's now an acknowledgement that something is fundamentally broken in the education system. Everyone has witnessed it. Doesn't matter where you cross on the political spectrum. Everyone knows the education system is broken. Now it's about fixing it. And it is going to take time. It's not like we could just wave a wand and by tomorrow all the defects will be rooted out of school. But the answer isn't to lower standards to keep cycling students through. We have to raise standards. And if we raise those standards, I have faith that the student body can meet those standards. I see my students, like my students may come into my classroom unprepared, but they are hungry to learn. And when you give them information, when you give them the facts, when you give them the truth, they are much more open-minded than most adults I know, and they are willing to learn. And you can trust them in that sense. So while, we constantly, I berate the millennials and Gen Z when they're willing to sacrifice our freedoms and liberties. 44% want, misgendering someone to be a crime, or 1/3 of millennials that want government surveillance cameras in people's homes. I implore those things, but it's because they haven't been taught the alternative. They haven't been taught the right way. Had they been taught the right way, those numbers would be different.
So there's hope that, if we start turning education around, then a lot of those viewpoints will obviously turn around as well. Just your quick take on the Supreme Court decision with affirmative action, also the student loan debacle. I feel like college campuses should be on the hook for a lot of these degrees and that they hand out that are totally worthless, in my opinion. What's your take on that, affirmative action and the latter?
Well, I'll take the latter first. So when we look at the whole student loan thing, obviously what President Biden did is completely unconstitutional, and that's what the Supreme Court ruled. It was largely predictable. But you're right. Why aren't the universities being held to account for the degrees that they put in these kids' hands? I mean, if you're investing tens of thousands of dollars, and these universities allowed you to get a degree where there's actually no occupation, no real career path, well, the fault lies with you, because you should have done the research first before you majored in that degree and actually earned that degree. But it also lies with the institution that actually offers these degree programs. And I think that we do need to start with the university system, because let's face it, if you want to forgive student loan debt, that's still not going to solve what the real problem is that led to the student loan debt, which is the outrageous cost of tuition. That's what you have to get to. Unfortunately, there's no real talk about that. And with student loan debt forgiveness, it's insulting to those that paid off their loans. It's insulting to those that never went to college or took out a loan for college. It's insulting to those people that learned a trade and went right into the workforce. Why should they have to bear the burden for those that chose to take out loans for an exorbitant amount of money? So I think the Supreme Court was right there. We should not have student loan forgiveness at all. It's something, if you took out a loan, we have to teach you, you are responsible when you sign that contract. But then again, they can't understand script anymore because they're not being taught it, so they don't know what a signature looks like. As far as affirmative action goes, when it comes to affirmative action, it served its purpose. I mean, we're in 2023. Why do the far left constantly want to make it as if we're living in 1930s America, 1940s America, 1950s? Times have changed. They've changed dramatically. We have the most open and tolerant generations going through the system now. Why are we treating them as if they're a bunch of racist bigots? And why are we actually promoting racism? Because that's the reason the whole affirmative action suit went before the Supreme Court, because Asian Americans were actually being targeted and discriminated against from getting into colleges because they were outperforming their peers. So this decision was the right decision. I fear that colleges are going to try and use backdoor attempts to try and keep race as part of the equation. But now there's tools. So if the college is found guilty and trying to backdoor attempt this new race admissions, the funding can be cut to that institution. And that's the way these institutions will pay attention. I mean, listen, the idea today that all of a sudden, and again, it shows you how they have no faith in minorities whatsoever. Well, if we do away with affirmative action, minorities won't be able to get into institutions. Well, then you're basically saying that minorities aren't capable. I mean, listen, half my students are minorities. I teach at a community college. Half my students are minorities. They're just as smart. they're just as intellectually curious and they're just as capable as their white counterparts. I have faith that they can achieve good things, that they could get into good schools, because I see it happening in real time. And they're doing it on their own merits. They're not doing it just because of the color of their skin. Yet the left says that, no, we have to do it because of the color of their skin, because they cannot perform themselves. And so we have to give them equity to have equal outcomes.
Man, this has been good stuff, Professor. I hope and pray that I've seen you different places, venues, as well as I was researching you, and I hope that you will continue to get gigs and speak and get on shows and so on, etc. We do need to hear more of this. Just I love your approach. It's just common sense. I can tell you're a good professor. I really can. There's some people that just come off as just snooty and all this kind of crap. I can tell you've lived in the real world. You have real life experience with the academic background as well. So God bless you for everything that you're doing. And I just hope your voice will be heard over and over and over again, and more people will wake up to what's happening in academia, K through 12, all the way up to higher education. So I definitely appreciate your time today, Professor. Where can people go to find you?
Thank you. And I'll keep speaking out until they throw me in a re-education camp, which may come down the pike. You never know.
we may be sellies there.
Yeah, we may be heading there. Anyone can go to campusreform.org. Campus Reform is such a great organization. And what we do is we highlight the madness on college campuses because the American people deserve to know what's going on. And we've been warning about this far left movement that's been going on since 2009. And look at how since then it's infected every aspect of society. So campusreform.org, pasreport.com, or they can follow me on any of the social media platforms at PAS Report.
All right, so guys, you've been tuning in to the Carl Jackson Show podcast with our guest, Professor Nicholas Giordano. Campusreform.org is where you can go to find him. Make sure you do share his message and get in the fight, man. Obviously, the educational system is, if you have, maybe there's a calling on your life that you need to be in the educational system, that you have common sense, you can be one of these professors or a teacher that will actually challenge their students, then perhaps that's where you need to be. We've got plenty of lefties in there, and you see how that's turned out. We need more professors like Nicholas Giordano here. So please also subscribe to the podcast. Again, wherever you go to get your podcast, Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you are, subscribe to our YouTube and Rumble pages. The Carl Jackson Show is where you can find us. All things social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Getter, Truth Social, at The Carl Jackson Show is where you can find me. And until next time, do not grow weary doing good. God bless you.